On the Road with Kelly and Bob is brought to you by Mueller Metal Roofs and Buildings. Made in America, made to last. Coming up on this episode...
I think it's important to remind people how stuff was made. We're so removed from that in today's world. We still buy things. We still need them fixed or replaced, but it's nice to see how people make things.
Hi, we're Kelly
and Bob Phillips, and we're on the perpetual road trip of America's back roads,
where the journey is always the destination. Thanks for joining us for this week's edition of On the Road with Kelly and Bob.
You know, Kelly, as you know, I have always been infatuated with America's history.
Yeah, but what is it about America's history that intrigues you so much?
It's our story. It's where we came from. It's how we got here and why we're here. One of the most, my favorite places happens to be Colonial Williamsburg. I've been there many, many times, and recently I got to take you there.
Mm-hmm. And we were probably there on one of the most important days of the year for that town.
It's the 4th of July in Colonial Williamsburg, Virginia, as hundreds of visitors line the sides of the Duke of Gloucester Street. The Fife and Drum Corps comes marching down the road, playing traditional patriotic music from the time of the Revolutionary War.
As the crowd closes in on the front of the Capitol building at the end of the street, a man emerges from a balcony and calls the people to order.
Hear ye! Hear ye! Draw near and give your attendance! From the Grand Congress in Philadelphia, July the 4th, 1776.
And Thomas Jefferson himself begins to read the document that set in motion the events of 1776 that made America free of British rule.
A declaration by the representatives of the United States of America. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people...
But just one block away, over on Nicholson Street, a carpenter and cabinet maker sets about his work just as he does every day, making furniture exactly like they did in colonial America.
So this is my workbench. This is where I do the vast majority of my work. I'm making a desk right now, which is right behind you here.
Bill Pavlak started out making things with his dad, but he always wanted to take it up a notch.
Landing a job as a cabinet maker at this prestigious Colonial Williamsburg shop put him right where he always wanted to be.
I've been here at Colonial Williamsburg since 2005 as a cabinet maker. Growing up in New York, I was interested in making stuff, doing woodworking with my dad around the house, but nothing that was fancy like the finer furniture we made here. Back in, around 2000 or so, got my first apartment, needed some furniture, made a futon out of 2x4s, and thought, well, that's pretty good. It was fun to do, but I thought maybe the next time I make something, it would be nice to try to make it a little nicer. So I got a book, and then one thing led to another, and just making fancier and fancier furniture, spending more time and money on tools and wood and so forth.
There are several reasons for having a cabinet-making shop at Colonial Williamsburg. First, as the historic site continues to develop as more and more archaeological discoveries are made here at the cradle of American freedom, historians need more and more authentic furniture.
Their only choice is to have it made in the same way it was made back then. And then there is the educational side. The cabinet makers not only make fine colonial-era furniture, They take time out to tell visitors what they are doing and why.
You all take turns doing this?
Yeah, we'll talk for an hour and then work for a while and then talk for an hour. And hopefully people are coming in and asking questions.
What are some of the questions that people ask when they come through here?
It's about things that we would think about. How much does that cost? And we're going to speak in pounds and pence and shillings, and so that's very foreign, and their economy is very different. So what does that mean? A beautiful desk and bookcase, a big piece of furniture, may have cost more than a lot of people were paying to rent their home for an entire year. So I think a lot of times it's about things like that. It's about questions that get them to kind of help them come into this world a little bit. What's it like to do this work? Is it hot in those clothes?
By the way, is it hot in those clothes?
They're very breathable. So yeah, right now John is making a table. It's called a gate leg table. Right? So a table with drop leaves. And, this is also for the Bray School project, but he is planing out all the blanks to become the legs and stretchers for this table. So working in walnut, planing it nice and flat and smooth and square. And then the next step for most of these pieces will be they'll be turned on our lathe into a nice decorative pattern.
Crafting things just like they did in the days of the American Revolution means more than making the furniture in a certain style.
It means doing it in the exact same way craftsmen did back then, even though modern methods would save a lot of time.
But here at Colonial Williamsburg, it's about authenticity and not about time saved.
I'll say that because we rarely have deadlines, this is usually pretty reasonable. And the 18th century obviously had deadlines, and so they're going to make choices. They're going to think like, all right, this is the back of a piece, no one's ever going to see it. I don't need to make that as nice as the front of the piece, for example. Honestly, if there's one thing I would plug in ahead of anything else, it wouldn't be a saw, it would be light. That's I found the hardest thing to get used to in this environment. On a cloudy, rainy day, it's hard to see what you're doing. And candlelight is only good for so much. Or in the winter, you have to plan your day. It's like, I know it's going to be kind of dark come 4:15 or so. What can I save for the end of the day?
Bill Pavlak has spent almost 20 years as a cabinet maker at Colonial Williamsburg, some of that time as an apprentice, learning from the masters who came before him. Now he is one of those masters that has dedicated his career to not just making furniture, but to finding out why our forefathers did things the way they did, and to teaching visitors the importance of that message.
Yet, with all the success and satisfaction that comes with this job, Bill still thinks back to those days he spent building things with his dad. It's moments like that that bring a smile to his face.
One of my fondest memories as a furniture maker is a few years before I started here, but the first, really I'd say nicer thing that I made as a hobbyist was a wall hanging clock, and it was for my dad for Christmas. And it was just a little, it's not the greatest thing now, it's hanging in my living room, but it's just a little bit fancier than everything that we had made together, and I know how proud he was of that. So that's something that learning it from him and being inspired by him, and then seeing that he was so proud that I had sort of taken what I learned from him and taken it another step further, I think. That's something that I'll always treasure.
Well, like most of the people we meet, Bill Pavlak is very into what he does for a living, and a big part of why we went to Virginia to visit with him in the first place.
Yeah, and he had a lot more to say about what they do and why they do it there in the cabinet making shop in Colonial Williamsburg.
Like with most things, right, you want to figure out, I always compare this to drawing, right? When you draw, you start with abstract shapes. that underlie whatever it is you're trying to draw, and then you start filling in the details. So a big desk like this with a bookcase on top of it is a big box with another big box on top of it. So that's where you start. You start on the outside, framing up these boxes, and then you work your way in. Well, once you have your box made and you need to fit drawers into it, you first need to divide that box up into the spaces for the individual drawers. So that's the second step, right? And then you probably screwed something up in a minor way in one of the first two steps. That's just inevitable. And that's fine, because what you're now going to do when you make the drawer is you're going to make drawer number 1 fit opening number 1. And you don't expect it to fit perfectly in any of the other spaces. So you can kind of roll with it a little bit. When you're first learning, it's a great way for things to snowball out of control. But as you get going, it's a great way to be a human being who can make things fit perfectly well. Not by expecting yourself to be perfect every time, but learning how to adjust and adapt.
And then there's the decorative part. I mean, is this what we call dental?
Exactly.
Okay,
Yeah.
so how do you even, I look at it and I think, how did they do that? How did you do that?
Because it's
Right.
by hand.
Right, it's by hand, and it's, maybe a little less tedious than it looks, but it can be tedious, so repetitive. That repetition helps speed you along, though. But it's a series, you're making a series of saw cuts and then chiseling out a little bit of wood in between those cuts. It's, for things like the decorative moldings, those curved shapes, we have specialized planes for making those. And, there's some lessons to learn on how to use those planes, but they are designed to help you do that job well and repeat that shape over and over again.
Is it true that no two pieces are alike?
Absolutely, yeah. So when I look at an antique, you don't always see this, but often enough, you'll see a piece and maybe there's 4 drawers that in theory are all the same size. So often, if you pull out the drawer, look on the underside, it'll have a number, like 1, 2, 3, or 4, and that space will also have the number. So that way, if everything's all pulled out, for whatever reason, you know where to put it back. So they count on that. They're taking advantage of things that are a little bit like assembly line thinking, but there are no interchangeable parts. So when we make a joint, like a dovetail joint, where we have to make something fit perfectly, you make the first half of the joint, and then that becomes the template for the second half of the joint. And so everything's going to be slightly unique.
The little ball at the top middle.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
So that finial, we would call that, like you might have over a lampshade or something. That is turned on a lathe. We have a lathe in the shop, just like a modern woodworker would have a lathe. Ours is foot powered, though. Yeah. So I'm riding my bicycle and doing craft work at the same time, and that's not as hard as it sounds. But once you've got that spinning piece of wood, the actual tools that you use and the techniques you use aren't that different from how a modern woodworker would do it. It just looks very different.
What's the satisfaction level for you at the end of the day? What does this job do for your soul?
I think it's really good for it. It's extraordinarily satisfying to make a nice finished piece of furniture that's polished and it works well, and knowing that started as a really rough sawn board. I don't have to start with a tree, but you took this raw material, this big piece of wood and a number of others that's not smooth and it's not flat, and to create something like that and to go through that whole process of problem solving. But then I think for me it's also about the connections, connecting to the people in the past that did this work and connecting the present to all of that, because I don't make anything without telling lots and lots of people about it. And so it's nice that it means something to all those people. Then usually we'll make something and send it out into the world. So it's extraordinarily satisfying to make something in a very 18th century way and still have it be usable and useful in a modern home.
Now, we were in Colonial Williamsburg, not only on one of their most important dates, but also probably one of the hottest days.
Yes, it was. We were there on the 4th of July, but it was worth it, right?
It was. It was definitely worth it.
I want people to know this. The other time to go is at Christmas. You just have to see it to believe it. You can go there. Everything is lit up the way it would have been back then.
Simple times.
Yeah.
And you can listen to On the Road with Kelly and Bob anywhere you get your podcast, or download that free Odyssey app and listen anytime, anywhere.